All right, welcome to Lecture 8, Part 4. I want to start with looking at your weekly outline for this week. You have a couple of assignments due. Your first assignment that you have is your Journal 24. The readings are listed here. They are also in the assignment description. Make sure you include a description on the readings. You also have your assignment on Unit 9, Document Set 2. This document set is going to ask you to contemplate the actions of FDR in the New Deal and how effective each of those New Deal programs were towards dealing with the Great Depression. So keep that in mind as you read through those. There's about 10 documents there. You have your short paper for Unit 9 that's due by Friday. You've had that for a couple weeks now. And then on Friday, your unit exam will go up and that'll be due by 11:59. That'll be the same format, 30 multiple choice, 1 extended response. Your study guide for that, your study sheet that has the terms and all of that information on there is already uploaded to your Unit 9 files, and I will email that to you in your This Week in U.S. History. All right, so this week, what are we dealing with? What are we looking at? We are looking at the New Deal. Now, last week we caught up on this transition of power from Hoover to FDR. The transition from Hoover to FDR, remember, we're switching political parties because Hoover's response was very hands off, trying to adopt that trickle down. Let's help push money into the banks, the corporations, the state governments will try to coordinate with local charities, or rather the state level charities, to solve the Great Depression, but that was not enough. So we are going to see FDR come in. Now, as I mentioned last week, FDR has been in politics. He's not new to the political sphere. He was diagnosed with polio at the age of 39. At that time, he will become wheelchair bound, but you'll see very few pictures of him in that wheelchair. Yes, lots of pictures of him sitting or standing with supports, but as we get closer to World War II, this is going to become important. He didn't want to be pictured in the chair as weak because that changes the public perception of a president. He's going to be governor of New York, which we talked about is incredibly important because that's where he gets this label as a reformer. He passes the Temporary Emergency Relief Administration at the state level in New York, and this TARA, as they refer to it as, becomes known as the initial step of New Deal policies. This is a very good representation of a progressive policy to approach the depression that had stricken New York State, which was huge because that's where a major hub, a major city, manufacturer is. You think of New York City, and that's where you see where Wall Street is, so the crash hitting there, and FDR's response was very easy to compare to Hoover's response at the national level. Uh, FDR notes the importance of the government response in recovery, the role of the government response. And he shows this not only as governor, but then campaigns on the idea that the government cannot be hands off. This depression will not solve itself. We need to get the government directly involved and be the leader of this recovery. Throughout FDR's presidency, in with the Great Depression and with World War II, there is going to be a heavy reliance on the radio. Remember, in the 1920s, the radio became a staple piece for family homes. Just like you think the TV today, think the radio at this time. He'll use the radio to speak to the American people. You guys read this week one of the fireside chats from FDR. The fireside chat is going to be important because he sat down by the fireside and was really looking to have a conversation with the American people because he believed that if the government is going to be this hands-on, progressive, present figure in the recovery, that the people also needed to know what was happening, what was successful, what was not successful. And he gave the people a why. He answered the question of, we're doing this because this is the problem. This is what we're trying to solve. So the connection with the people here is very prevalent through his use of the radio. FDR's approach to the Great Depression is trial and error. He's going to think with the mindset of, this is the Great Depression. This is not a depression that we've seen before. This is not something the United States has brought itself out of, that the government has a playbook for. So he'll say, we're going to try everything. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to try something else. His quote here is, if it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. And he goes into it with the idea, I'm going to fail. Things are going to go wrong. But we have to do something. Sitting here and just letting it go is only letting it get worse. When we look at FDR, he is going to have a diverse cabinet in that he appoints the first female to a cabinet position, and that'll be Frances Perkins, and she'll be the Secretary of Labor. So taking a real new approach to the presidency. We're going to see the emergence of the role of the First Lady with Eleanor Roosevelt. As First Lady, Eleanor comes into the role knowing how to work politics. When FDR served in the state senate, she had a long career as a political helpmate. She learned about Washington, how politics worked. When FDR went on to be the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, she was ready for that role. At the time when FDR gets diagnosed with polio, she's going to tend to him devoutly. She becomes active in the women's division of the State Democratic Committee to keep his political interests alive and their face in the public. He has a very successful campaign as governor, and she's going to be at his side. She becomes known as the eyes and ears of him, a trusted and tireless supporter of her husband. And then all of this political background she brings with her into the White House and understands the social conditions better than any other First Lady that had come before her. And she's going to use that knowledge to transform the role of the First Lady. She will do the entertaining and the greeting and the charming, but she's also going to break precedent and hold press conferences. She's going to travel all over the country, give lectures and radio broadcasts, and express her opinions candidly in her own newspaper column that was called My Day. So she, instead of being the First Lady that stands behind her husband, she becomes the First Lady that stands next to her husband. And we've seen First Ladies kind of take her lead from there on out. And when we talk about FDR, we're going to be talking about his first 100 days with the New Deal. In that time, it becomes a measuring stick for a success of a president. You've heard with Trump, with Biden, they each talked about the work that they would do in their first 100 days coming into the presidency. And it's because of what FDR did. Now, no president is going to compare. Okay, the situation here, you cannot say that any president does more than FDR in his first 100 days. Not possible. Fight me. But during his first 100 days, he is actively working every day. The amount of executive orders is insurmountable. And he's going to pass 15 bills. Okay, to note how important this is, the emergency stimulus package that was just passed by Biden, that is one bill, okay? That is one law that has many different pieces in it, but that's just one. FDR is going to sign into place 15 which means that we are moving at a breakneck speed in Congress to get 15 bills not only through the House but back through the Senate, and then both reapproved by each the House and the Senate and signed by the president to actually be enacted. That is fast work. Okay? All of the bills, all of the executive responses, executive actions that are taken by FDR in his first 100 days are going to have the goal of the 3 R's. Note these are important. We are looking at relief from the current crisis. We're looking to recover the nation's economy, and we're looking to put in place reform to make sure that there are no future depressions as bad as this. All of this work is going to illustrate the progressive nature of this presidency. I am going to try not to make this a million years long, but I've got no promises here. We've got a lot of information to cover, and all of it's important, equally important. We are going to start with the 3 R's. When we look at the 3 R's, we have relief, recovery, reform. And these are going to be the different categories that the New Deal programs fall into. So relief obviously comes first because we have to deal with the problems that are immediate, the ones that if we don't handle them now, the nation can't continue. And the biggest problem that we have is the banks. Remember, we talked about how the banks were just kind of playing with monopoly money, investing in the stock market, taking people's life savings and kind of gambling it away. So we saw the bank runs happen immediately after the stock market crashes. We have banks failing, and we had many bank closures throughout the United States. So the first thing that FDR comes in to do, he passes the Emergency Banking Relief Act. This legislation is called the Bank Holiday, and what it essentially did was provide a plan to reopen the banks after examiners had found the banks to be financially secure. This was prepared by the Treasury staff during Hoover's administration, but isn't going to be introduced and actually put into action until March of 1933, after FDR is in the presidency. Um, it happens in such a chaotic fashion that many in Congress didn't even have the opportunity to read the legislation before the vote was called for. But that just goes to show the immediate need for this to happen. So the number one issue being the bank failures means that we have to get the people to trust the banks again. So the bank holiday provided a time where the banks would be temporarily shut down, and these banks would not be able to be reopened until they had been pre-approved by by the Treasury. So we're looking at making sure that the banks are financially secure, telling the people that the banks are financially secure, and hopefully boosting that trust. Now, you read the fireside chat on the Emergency Banking Relief Act, the bank holiday. And so the president was very open about what this act would do. And it included broadening the powers of the president, extending that presidential authority during this crisis, and making sure that these banks return to full function and that they'll be regulated. So no more can they gamble away the people's saving. Because banks don't work unless people put their money in there. So we need to make sure that the people know that the banks aren't going to do what they did before. So when we close the banks to allow for the regulation, to allow for the organization, to make sure that currency is going to have faith put back into it, this sets the tone for FDR's presidency. It shows that he's not afraid to take risks. It shows that he's not afraid to extend the presidential powers to do what is best for the people. We need to put faith back into the banks. We need to get people putting their money in a secure location again. We need to get the banks being able to loan out money to institutions that need it. We need the Federal Reserve to make sure that there is emergency currency in the form of the federal bank notes, to make sure that we have money that can be moved around. And this shows that FDR isn't messing around. He's ready to get his hands dirty, and he's ready to take care of the issues. The next part of the relief that we need to get into is unemployment. Uh, one of beyond the banks, the number two problem is how do we employ the unemployed? Remember, I told you unemployment at this time was up to 24.9%. That is a quarter of the United States population that does not have a job, which means they don't have money coming in. There is no unemployment. There is no aid from the government getting into these people's hands. The only way that we can help them is by giving them a job. So FDR is going to come up with these are three of the major programs to get the people employed. The first one is the Public Works Administration, the PWA. This is going to be put together in 1933, and it's designed to reduce unemployment and increase the purchasing power through the construction of highways and public buildings. So we're working on the infrastructure of the United States here. This is going to be set up by Roosevelt under his Secretary of the Interior. And during its existence, the PWA is going to spend about $4 billion on the construction of more than 70% of the nation's new education buildings, 65% of the courthouses, city halls, sewage disposal plants, 35% of its new public health facilities, and 10% of the roads, bridges, and subways. So we're looking at improving the infrastructure of the nation, but also building new buildings that we actually need. Uh, this is going to gradually be phased out in 1939 when the United States starts to transition into that wartime economy. So the PWA puts people to work at building up the United States, making it look better, getting our infrastructure to be more sound, more secure. The next way we get people employed is the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. This is going to employ mostly unskilled men to carry out public works infrastructure projects. They're going to build new school buildings, over 4,000 of them. They're going to build new hospitals. They're going to lay about 9,000 miles of storm drains and sanitary sewer lines. We're going to be building new bridges. We're going to look at new airfields. We're going to repair roads. We're going to plant trees. This is also a piece of the artistic projects that you looked at in your New Deal, Great Depression images that you did last week. So we're not only looking at public works that we can build, that we can take care of, but we're also looking at artistic projects to go after a different skill set of the unemployed. The next one we have here is the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. And this is going to look at improving the nation's lands. And this is going to look at a very specific subset of the unemployed. This is going to be young men from the age of 18 to 25, roughly. And what we're looking at here is putting men to work that it didn't really have a specific skill set. Under this, we're working with the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, and Agriculture. What they're looking at is fighting forest fires, planting trees, cleaning and maintaining access roads within our national parks, reseeding grasslands, grazing lands, and implementing soil erosion controls. Additionally, they're going to build wildlife refuges, fish rearing facilities, water storage basins, animal shelters. And the goal of this is to encourage citizens to get out and enjoy America's natural resources. they're going to look at campground facilities as well. So we're taking care of the nature. We're giving people jobs outside. Now, the very interesting piece of the CCC is that these these youth, these urban youth that were putting to work ages 18 to 25, they would often live, they would be taken from the cities and go and live in campsites, and their housing, their food would be paid for, and they would essentially get a stipend that they could send back to their families. So we're solving a twofold problem here. We're getting America's youths out of the city into a job where they are taken care of at the job, and they can send money back to their families. So this was a very unique program in that light. We are moving into the recovery portion of the New Deal. So the relief part was to take care of the immediate problems, provide immediate relief. The recovery is kind of more of a long-lasting, let's fix the bigger problems that are going to help pull us out of the problems that led up to the Great Depression. And the National Recovery Act is going to be one of the first pieces of the recovery portion of the New Deal. The NRA, as it's called, creates the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Administration. The goal here is to strike a balance between industrial self-regulation and governmental planning to keep in mind the interest of all parties involved in this relationship. So we're trying to find a balance between industry self-regulating itself and the government planning on production, on price, on employment, things like that. The act is going to authorize councils composed of representatives from industry, government, and consumer groups to draw up codes that would create fair wages and prices for each industry. Now, this is aiming to create a relationship between business, government, and workers to make sure that we don't get to a point where we have high unemployment, high prices, little buying, overproduction, all of those causes that led to the Great Depression in the first place. We're trying to integrate a cooperation in the economy rather than competition. And what interestingly this does is it suspended the antitrust laws and designed a new code that was accepted by the government that was supposed to be truly representative of the trade or the industry involved. So we're looking at not promoting monopolies, but looking to not oppress business. So here we're saying the antitrust laws are going to be removed to allow business to grow, but with monitors to make sure that we aren't eliminating small businesses as well. This also looked at providing maximum and minimum hours of work, minimum wages, and we're looking to guarantee freedom for workers to join unions, but this is going to be declared unconstitutional by the courts, saying that the government is overreaching its power and violating the Constitution by regulating commerce within the states, which is a state power as designated by the Constitution. So in 1935, the Supreme Court is going to say, okay, this overreaches the federal government's power. This is doing too much. This is going too far, and the Supreme Court will say it's unconstitutional, which essentially gets rid of the program. And the court case, and we'll talk about this one more in class, is going to be the Schechter Poultry Corporation versus the United States case in 1935, where the National Recovery Act gets declared unconstitutional. So, even knowing FDR is going to take this hands on approach and try to go very hard in the paint against the Great Depression, there will be limits to what he can do. And the limits are going to be addressed by the Supreme Court in finding these programs unconstitutional, saying this is a check on your power. There needs to be a balance here. You can't have sweeping powers that you can do whatever you want to. So the Supreme Court will sometimes stand in the way of FDR when he's trying to get these get these programs put into place. Okay, on to the next one, the recovery portion. We need to deal with what's happening in the agricultural sector of the economy. Remember, we had the Dust Bowl, we had terrible conditions out in the West for farmers who are now trying to relocate to jobs that don't exist elsewhere because of the depletion of the soil, the overproduction in agriculture. So we have to solve that problem. And the way we're going to solve that is by the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The goal here is to restore the purchasing power of farmers to pre-World War I levels. So we need to solve the overproduction problem to get prices to kind of rebalance in agriculture. What this does is it essentially tells farmers to farm less. Uh, we're going to use money to pay farmers to cut back production about 30% and then tax companies that bought farm products and process them into food and clothing to make up for that change in revenue there. The AAA is trying to balance the supply and demand of farm products so that prices can support a decent purchasing power for farmers. Uh, this is going to go after the 7 basic crops, and those are going to include corn, wheat, cotton, rice, peanuts, tobacco, and milk. So we're going after these products in order to kind of bring some stability back to the market. Uh, we're fixing the problems of the Dust Bowl as well, because if we're not overproducing the soil, then maybe we're going to provide some nutrients back into the soil to allow for farmers to farm instead of being faced with these terrible conditions. But the Supreme Court in 1936 is also going to find the AAA unconstitutional, ruling that it violates the 10th Amendment, again, just like the NRA violated the 10th Amendment. And the Supreme Court case that this one gets declared unconstitutional in is the United States versus Butler. So again, the Supreme Court is going to try to limit the powers to make sure that FDR isn't overreaching too far, too much. The last piece of the recovery portion of the New Deal is going to be the Tennessee Valley Authority. So the Tennessee Valley Authority aimed to improve the navigability of the Tennessee River, to provide flood control through reforestation of lands in the Tennessee Valley watershed. We're looking to develop agriculture, commerce, and industry in the valley, and we're looking to operate the hydroelectric Wilson Dam. This is going to cover an area of 7 states, including parts of Tennessee, obviously, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. And this is going to look to take care of regions that had previously not been paid too much attention to. Not only to encourage people to move there, but to also employ and make the place safe to live in. what we see happen is that the TVA has the authority to acquire lands around the Tennessee River and any of its tributaries that extend off of that for construction for future dams, reservoir, and transmission lines and power plants. So we're looking to modernize the nation's most impoverished region and make sure that there's affordable, reliable power for all in the United States. And this encouraged economic development and provided jobs at the same time to these rural areas. So we're kind of hitting a whole bunch of problems into one. We're looking to improve in a rural area, we're establishing electricity, we're taking care of the land, and we're providing jobs. So the TVA is huge when it comes to recovery because we're taking care and relieving some problems, but we're also setting up for the future in these areas as well. Okay, we're on to the third R, reform. These are going to sound pretty familiar, I hope. Okay, so reform, this section of the New Deal programs that are put into place is to make sure that another Great Depression never, ever happens again. We cannot be put in a place where the economy starts to push into a recession and get so deep into a depression that we cannot pull ourselves out of. So, this is putting in safeguards for the American people if another recession begins to fall into a depression. So, what's something that we needed? Well, we needed somebody to make sure that when we put money in the bank, that that money is guaranteed to come back to us. And this is going to be the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Now, look at the words there. Deposit insurance. When you make a deposit into the bank, that means you're putting money into the bank. This is making sure that your money is protected. If you don't see that sticker up at the top that says FDIC when you go to the bank, do not put your money in there. That means that they don't protect your money. That means that it might not be there. Most banks now, I think all banks now, have those stickers in the windows somewhere that you can see them. And that just means that when you put money in the bank, it will be there when you want it to be there. Uh, the Glass-Steagall Act is going to set up a firewall between commercial banks. This is going to accept deposits, issue loans, and investments banks that negotiate the sale of bonds and stocks. So the bill is going to state that it was designed to provide for the safer and more effective use of the assets of the banks, to regulate interbank control, to prevent the undue diversion of funds into speculative operations, and for further purposes. This is all just a really fancy way of saying the government is going to make sure the banks have rules and that those rules get followed so that there are no more bank runs and there will be no bank failures and we won't have to have a bank holiday ever again. We're putting faith in the bank, getting people to trust them again so that their money can go in the bank. Okay, so that's the major problem that we fixed so that we don't have another Great Depression that's so terrible. The next problem that we're looking to fix is the stock market, which was just a hot mess. Remember, we had people buying on margin, which meant that they were buying stocks that they didn't really have the money to buy. We had speculation in the market, which meant that we were using people's money that was saved in the bank to buy stocks. Again, not real money. We also had stock prices rising so fast that companies could not justify their stock price. Now, let's take a minute on this. Today, if we look at Apple, and I'm making up this number, don't hold me to it. If we look at Apple, usually the share sits around $1,000. It may be more than that, I haven't looked in a while. But that $1,000 stock price has to be rooted in sales, has to be rooted in the company has to be able to prove that that price matches what they do day to day. So that means that Apple makes a lot of money. The higher the stock price, the better off your company is supposed to be doing. Okay, when you purchase a stock, you are purchasing a part of a company. You're not going to purchase a part of Apple for $1. Okay, that company is too big, it makes too much money, it has the assets to back it up. Now, during the 1920s, stock prices were rising. Companies had no idea the changes that were happening in their stock prices, nor could they provide any validity to what the price was. That's not good. Now, a part of that is technology. They're doing the whole stock market on paper during the 1920s, so that's a little rough. But a big part of it was they were just guessing. Oh, yeah, let's set it at $300 today. That sounds great. No, that's not great. So the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to provide regulation of the stock market. It's going to force companies to prove their worth, prove their stock price, set up government regulation of what the stock market is doing, how we're purchasing, what we're purchasing, which is exactly what we needed. And the last one, the Social Securities Act. This is huge, okay? I say this because this was designed in the Great Depression, something that was not meant to be permanent. Let me say that again. Social Security was not meant to be permanent. Not meant to be. The boomers ruined it. They're too big. Let me tell you why. Social Security was supposed to be a contract between generations, and the way this worked was to provide security for society. Those that are currently in the working field, that are employed to date, are going to have to give up a portion of their wages to a government agency that would then pay for those that have worked their entire life to not work anymore. The goal of Social Security was to get old people out of their jobs so that young people could have jobs again. All right, so it was meant to open up jobs to employ the unemployed. That's part one of it. So if you currently work, you pay Social Security in the hopes that someday when you hit 65, you can start pulling from Social Security because you've been paying into it your entire life. Okay, that sounds great until we have a huge boom in the population, which is the boomers, and there's too many old people and not enough young people to pay into Social Security. So we run into problems with Social Security more in the current times than we did back here because it made sense. We needed to get the old people out of their jobs, we needed to get young people in, but we can't just take the old people out without setting up some way to keep money in their pockets. So Social Security solved that problem in the 1930s. What it also set up was unemployment insurance, which is something that we needed. So if you ever do find yourself unemployed due to conditions outside of your control, you can file to get payment from the government to make sure that you do not go without. Now, if you go into work and say, I quit, you cannot get unemployment, okay? Don't ever do that. If they fire you, if you get hurt at work, that can fall under different pieces of Social Security. But you can file for government aid so that you do not go without a paycheck. The whole point of Social Security is to make sure that everybody has money coming in because we've seen what happens when people in the United States don't have money. The economy freezes, and then we have a whole trickle down effect. That's the real trickle down of this paralysis in the economy. Okay, one more part. We're going to do the reform. When we look at reform, uh, this is still the part of we need to put in place long lasting changes to make sure that bad things don't happen again. We need to take care of our workers. We need to make sure that workers' rights are being recognized. And the way that we do this is through the National Labor Relations Act. This is also known as the Wagner Act. This sets up a new independent National Labor Relations Board with real enforcement powers to protect the rights of workers. Under this new law, employee union elections are going to be certified by the National Labor Relations Board and are going to be based on majority rule. And we have this protection of workers. We have collective bargaining rights being being acknowledged, and we're making sure that unfair labor practices such as blacklisting, strike breaking, discriminatory firings, that can't happen. Okay, so the National Labor Relations Board is going to monitor these actions by holding hearings and compelling compliance with management. And this is huge because when a huge number of workers are being laid off and they're not being acknowledged to the conditions that they're going into, that creates problems. We already tried to solve these in the progressive era, but clearly it didn't work. So the National Labor Relations Act looks at the laborers and acknowledges that they have the power to negotiate for better conditions, and they should not be penalized for that. And then we have the Fair Labor Standards Act. We've talked about this once before. This is going to be passed in 1938. It acknowledges youth employment standards. So, your work standards that you go by today, not being able to work a certain number of hours during the school week, not being able to work in certain industries, that comes from the Fair Labor Standards Act. We're acknowledging the shift that children need to get out of the workplace and into the schools. We also establish overtime pay at the national level. We establish a minimum wage. Big hot topic today with the minimum wage. Trying to raise it so that we can have a livable wage. And this is huge because we needed to acknowledge that people were being mistreated during a time where things were bad enough. We shouldn't be looking to working as a problem. It should be a plus. So this helps address the issues with workers. I am going to stop here. We're going to cover the rest in class because we're at 42 minutes and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on the rest. What you need to do for your workload this week, make sure you're doing those Unit 9 readings. Make sure that you are doing the Unit 9 document set 2. And don't forget about your short paper, and do not forget about the unit exam that'll be posted on Friday. Any questions, please let me know.